This is Dr. Barry Graham of Southwestern Christian College. This video, like many of the others, is a review of our Schoology training. This session was originally conducted on July 10, 2018. You're seeing the agenda for that day's session. Scrolling to the bottom, after our last training, you should have been able to successfully import the course template for use of one of your fall courses. Actually, you'll be using it for all of your fall courses, and learn to upload your syllabus into your course page. Now, if you missed that material, please be sure to go back to the previous video, which is on the Schoology Training group page in Schoology that we'll be looking at here in just a moment. Now, after today's training, you should be able to enter your student learning outcomes from your course into your resources. You should be able to enter assignments, assessment instruments, student resources, and rubrics into Schoology. And of course, that presupposes that you create these assignments and these rubrics, and we will look at that today. And we're going to learn how to align SLOs with assessments. Now, this is especially important because this is what enables you to assess mastery. And this is what we always want to be doing in Schoology, both for formative assessment and summative assessment. And this will greatly aid you in your assessment report to institutional effectiveness at the end of each semester. So let's now go to Schoology. You've learned how to log into Schoology, so we won't review that. But let's just for a second look at our group page. I'll scroll down and you'll notice SWCC Schoology Training. We'll click on that, and this is where we post notices. This is where we have our calendar. Some of our events have not been posted, but we will correct that in the future. Very important here, this is our resources. Here is the aforementioned video that we mentioned over our training back on July 5, and there's some other resources here obviously as well. So we'll be looking today at how to upload those SLOs, create those assessments, things of this nature. And let's just go back and briefly look at that again. So let's start with the first one, entering your student learning outcomes into your resources. Now, you'll recall that your personal resources are different from the resources that are a part of a page or a group. So you'll want to go to your home page right up here. And you can actually access this from any page. It's just that this is the page that will come up when you open Schoology. So we want to get you used to seeing that and noting that, once again, you can access your resources from anywhere. We hit our drop down, click on it, and then we go to Personal Resources. This is where you keep your stuff in effect. These are your resources. These are your collections. You can create as many collections as you want to. They'll look like a little file box right here, but this is the one that we're interested in right now. Remember that in Schoology, what they call learning objectives is what we call student learning outcomes. That will serve for our purposes. So don't let that confuse you. I know those terms are not generally considered to be synonymous, but for our purposes they will. So we're going to go to our learning objectives, and what you'll notice over here is that I've already created folders for all my various courses. I have a few extra folders just for my personal use, but I've done this already. Begin creating folders for your courses so that you can house your student learning outcomes in there. Let's show you how that's done. Click Add at the top and click Folder. This allows you to add a folder And let's say the name of your course is, we're just going to put English ENG 131. You could spell it out as you want, if you want to. I like to name my courses pretty much the way they appear in the catalogs, but just for the sake of the example here, let's say this is going to be English 131. Now, you have further information here if you want to put more detail. English 130, correct that, 131, freshman composition. Okay, and that gives you a little more detail there. So we'll click Create, and it will always create the folder at the bottom of your list. Now, you can rearrange these later, so don't worry about that if they're not particularly in the order that you want. But you'll notice that by clicking on it, I open it up, but of course there's nothing there. But this is where you want to add your student learning objectives. Actually, your student learning outcomes, sorry. Add custom learning objectives. Now, you'll also notice there's some state standards, Common Core. This is very good for K through 12 that are using Common Core or particular state standards. We're not doing that in this case, so we're going to click on Custom Learning Objectives. So, up here at the top, I would keep this very simple. Look in your course syllabus. You've already created your student learning outcomes, or you will be before you distribute your syllabus to your students. So just to keep it simple, I'm going to put SLO1, or I could do it the way that I previously did it here, SLO1. That's why it came up. And here you can simply go to your syllabus and copy paste your student learning outcome right here. Once you've copied it, you'll notice as you right click, you can click paste. Now, mine's grayed out because I haven't copied anything. Now, this assumes you know how to copy paste, and of course there are shortcut keys in Windows that copy is Control C and then paste is Control V. So that's ready to go. Now, in the event that you just prefer to type it in, and you're that type of person, you can certainly do that. All right, so the student will compare and contrast the works of, let's pick some writers. Maybe the assignment in this for composition purposes is the instructor is having them read certain things and do some compare and contrasting. That's probably not real appropriate for English 131, so I'm sorry, I'm going to start over on that. The student will compose a thesis statement in a concise and understandable manner. I just came up with that off the top of my head. That may or may not be a great student learning outcome, but it serves for our purposes here. All right? I'm going to create it. Now, the important thing now is I have this target icon. That means I have some student learning outcomes to work with. And so when it comes time to aligning these within our assessment instruments, this, once again, just to underscore how important this is what will allow us to assess mastery of these student learning outcomes. Basically, see if the students are accomplishing what we're wanting them to accomplish, and a way to be able to measure that. All right. I'm going to go back by clicking up here, go back to my root directory of my particular resources here. Once again, these even though it says learning objectives, these are my student learning outcomes, and I have these set up for my particular courses. Now, at this point, you only have one student learning outcome, and you'll probably have more than that. You may have 3, 4, 5, whatever it is that you have in your syllabus. And so you'll need to create these either by copy pasting as you create them. Remember, you click Add Custom Learning Objective, and then that's when you'll fill in the necessary material, or copy paste or paste it in here based upon what you've copied from your syllabus. We'll go on now and look back at our training agenda. In this case, we're learning how to enter assignments, assessment instruments, student resources, and rubrics into Schoology. Each one of these are separate items, so we're just going to try to take these in order. Let's enter an assignment into Schoology. To do that, we have to go to our course, or one other thing we could consider at this point is we actually can create assignments within our resources, which makes it very easy for us to import them into our course later. But in this case, we're going to consider the idea that maybe you're creating your course for the first time and you're going to export the course into your resources for use in the future later. So different ways you can do this, but this is the way we're going to approach it for now. So in this case, from what we learned last time, we have already imported the course shell or the template into a course that we're going to be teaching this semester. I just called mine Example Training Import, but yours would be labeled, say, English 131 or whatever the name of your course is, how it appears in the catalog. And let's go to the Let's Get Started folder. Now what you'll notice here is there are some examples from a Bible course. This is how how this particular template was created by Dr. Kathy. And there's already at least one assessment instrument in here, and it's a sample test that we see right up here. But we are going to assume that obviously you need to know how to do this. So let's go to Add Materials. Whenever we click on Add Materials, this is where we add our content to a course. And so assessment instruments would be things like assignments or test, quiz, assessments, discussions could be assessments. You could even do a page with multiple assignments on it, but for the time being we're going to ignore that since that's in a kind of a different realm. Now what they've done here is they've already created a test for you, but let's see how that process works. We're going to click on Add Test. Okay, we're going to call this Example Quiz. Notice we can put a due date on it. If we do that, that's a really important thing because that means it will appear in your class calendar for this course. That way the student can see it instantly on the right hand side of the page when they enter the course. They know what's coming up, assuming it's something that's coming up fairly soon. So it's always a good idea to put a date on these things. So let's say we're going to assign that as early as tomorrow. Here we want to make sure that we assign a category to it. Now, you create categories by going to your gradebook setup over here when you're setting up your gradebook, and that's where you'll actually be creating your categories. You can do it from here, but it's advised, best practices, try to go ahead and set up your categories ahead of time. That makes it possible for you to be able to weight those particular assignments and assessments, because your quizzes may be worth 50% of their grade, and something else might be worth, the discussions might only be worth 10% of their grades. This is very, very important on this. In this case, there's a quiz category that's already been set up. So we're going to choose that category, and here on our scale, we want to make sure that we choose standard grading scale so that the scale is the same for all of our classes here at Southwestern Christian College. So we're going to, one other thing we should look at, grading options. This gives us a few other options to look at. We can actually individually weight this assignment outside of the grade book. If you have a particular quiz that you feel like the material is especially needs to be emphasized with the student, that way we can make it more valuable by going from 1 to, say, to 2 or 3. In other words, you can make this test count twice as much as another test by picking a 2, or 3 times as much of a test by clicking 3, and etc. You get the idea on that. Here we can actually set the test as a midterm or a final, which basically creates its own grading category for it. I'm sorry, that's not grading category, but its own grading term. So let's uncheck it. You'll notice by default it's gone to our upcoming grading category. Now in this case, I'm going to put no grading period because I don't want this to be pushed out in my actual assignments, because obviously it's just an example. So let's go ahead and click Create. And now I can create my test. This is where I add my questions. When I add a question, it can be true, false, multiple choice, ordering, short answer essay question, fill in the blank, matching. And then for the more advanced users, if you've already created questions or imported questions, and there are ways to do that that we'll have training on in the future, you can actually bring them in from a question bank, or you can actually import in an entire test if it's in the correct format. Again, that's training for the future. And these other two things here you can ignore for the time being. But let's keep it simple. Let's just pick a true-false question. All right. So we can ask the question here that today is July 16, 2018. Is that true or false? Now, the settings in Schoology by default choose true. It has to have something there by default, so since true comes before false, they pick true. So if the correct answer is true, obviously I would just leave it here as true, but if the correct answer was false, I would need to change it, such as this. Now, if you're doing the type of test where you want the student to keep going until they get a correct answer, you can require a correction if they don't get it correct. They don't get it correctly. So, but that's only in a case like this. In this case, we'll just assume it's more of a traditional thing. Again, we're going to leave it as true. This is an objective question, which means it has only, one correct answer. So we don't click subjective question. If you wanted it to be timed, and this is important, not only can you time, as we'll show you, the overall test, but you can actually time an individual question. So if you have an essay question that you want them to have more time on than, say, just a simple true, false, or multiple choice question, you could actually do that. But again, that's something we can look at more in the future. Grading, really important here. By default, it comes up on 1. If you leave all your questions on 1, they're all going to get equal value, and in your grade book, the results of the test are all going to be assessed on a 100-point scale. So please don't worry that, let's say you have 10 questions, you want them all to be the same, so you would think, oh, well, I have to put a 10 there because 10 times 10 is 100. You don't have to do that. As long as this number is the same, they will all get the same value. All right. But now, if you have a question that you want it to receive more value than another, you can change this. I want this particular question, let's say, to be worth twice as much as any of the other questions, or the questions that have a 1. I could change that. In this case, I don't want that. I'm going to change it back to just a number, just the 1, and I'm going to create the question. Okay, now I have a question, and I can just continue to do that for whatever number of questions that I have in the test. So I can also do a multiple choice, and for the sake of this session today, we'll just do 1 true false, 1 multiple choice. Okay, what year was SWCC, Southwestern Christian College, founded? Question mark. By default, it'll give you 4 choices, but you can add more choices right here. Add 1. If you make some mistakes along the way, accidentally leave something blank and you don't need it, you can also remove the blanks. Alrighty. Southwestern Christian College was actually founded, there's actually 2 possibilities. 1949 and also 1950 would be considered correct in some cases. Let's put some wrong answers in. Let's say it certainly was not founded in 2018, the current year, and it was also not founded in 1972. And again, we could add answers. All right. We can randomize these choices if we want to, so that each student has a different order in which they're answering the question. This can be good to deter cheating. A student that's looking over at, a particular question will not have the same choice number 1 as somebody else. All right. Allow partial credit. That can be something that comes into effect. If both of these questions are correct, then you could technically say, okay, I'm going to allow partial credit for this, and you could put in some additional options. In this particular case, we're gonna say, okay, there's only 1 correct answer. But if we did want to say there was more than 1 correct answer, we could certainly do that too. 1950 would also be considered correct in some cases, so we could check both of those so that either one would be selected for a correct answer. We also have a show feedback. This allows you to give students feedback for each answer or for the whole question, and view submissions, and we'll show you that in a few minutes. View submissions must be enabled in order for them to be able to see those. So again, if you want to give students immediate feedback, you can do that. That's good for formative assessment sometimes, but again, that is totally up to you. Let's say in this case, I want to go ahead and randomize it. I'm going to click Create Question, and now I've got a couple of questions. Your test assessment instrument would probably be longer than this, but let's go with this for now. Now notice up here submissions are disabled, so the students cannot submit everything at this point, so you don't have to worry about somebody trying to get in there and submit a test when they're not supposed to. But there's other safeguards on that too, and we're going to look at some of those right now. Go to Settings on our second tab. You'll notice, here it is right here, submissions are disabled. So if I want the students to be able to take this, even if it's going to be in the future, I need to be able to enable this test. This will enable it immediately. This will enable it only through a certain time period, from today through whatever I set it up for. If I chose this, I could choose a date and say, okay, they can take it from today until Wednesday the 18th, if I checked there. I can give them a certain amount of time to take the test. From until. This allows me to set up a date in which the test will open and a date that it will close. And that can be very helpful as well. In this case, I'm just going to click Enabled. Time limit. Again, another very good thing to deter cheating, especially if you're teaching some online tests this semester or any semester. This means that they're going to have to complete the test in a certain period of time, and this deters them looking up answers and things of this nature. So if I pick yes, it's going to give me a minute option here, and I can choose, say, okay, depending on how many questions there are, I'm going to give them 30 minutes. It might be longer, it might be shorter. It just depends upon the number of questions and what I choose. Real important here, attempt limit. If this is strictly going to be a one-shot test, you want to give it to them and you don't want to allow them any additional opportunities, leave it at the default, one time. But if you would like to give them more than one opportunity, say it's one of those tests like a quiz over your syllabus where you want them to keep taking it until they score 100. You may want to give them multiple times, 10 times, 9 times, or right up here at the top, unlimited opportunities. Whatever you choose here other than one time, it's going to give you the option to grade it by the highest score they make, whatever the last score was that they took, or an average of every attempt. That is completely up to you. All right. I'm going to change this in this case back to one time. Randomize order. Again, very good to deter the student looking on somebody else's computer screen. If I choose this, it's going to randomize the order of the questions. Now, what you have to be careful for here is if you have a question that's directly related to a previous question, you don't want to randomize the order, because you wouldn't want to ask the student according to the previous question and then ask them some question on that, because they're not going to be, that wouldn't necessarily be the previous question. Excuse me. So, but assuming that it's a test where none of the questions ask those types of questions related to a direct or previous or following question, you can randomize, and I recommend personally that you do this. Page breaks. You can choose one question per page, and this means that page breaks will be ignored when randomize order is set to yes. So you can't really do page breaks in a case like this when they're randomized. So you can just leave that at the default. Language keyboard, none. That comes into play with other issues. We won't discuss that right now. Question review. I recommend that you choose yes here. I always appreciated the opportunity to go back and double check my answers when I take a test, because sometimes you might have second thoughts. You want to change your mind. Resumable. Once again, I highly recommend choose yes here, because if the computer crashes or their phone crashes, whatever device they're using the test on, this allows them to get back in. Okay. View submissions. Depending upon what type of test it is and your own preferences, if you leave this as no, they're not going to see any grading results for their test. If there's an essay question, even if you pick yes, they won't see any results, grading results for their test, because you have to grade that essay manually before a final grade can be determined. There's also an option here for yes with correct answers. Most instructors will not do that. You're not just trying to give away answers on a test, but there may be certain types of tests where you may choose that. So another factor you want to consider is if you choose yes and everything is an objective, true, false, multiple choice type question, they will immediately see their grade. If this is the type of class where you have students that tend to disrupt other students based upon the results they're seeing, you may not want to choose yes, because that can really distract the other students if, say, the student gets a great grade and they start celebrating and yelling and hooray and all that, or they did really poorly and they're tempted to say disparaging remarks. And again, if they're tempted to say something audible that would disrupt the other students, you may want to avoid that. remember that regardless, once the test is graded, they're still able to go to their grade book and see the results. So you may want to just choose no here. Up here, if you want to preview the test as the instructor and see what it's going to look like as the student, you can click here. As the students are signing in and taking the test, you can choose this. You can actually see when they log in. You can see their grade. You can view the actual attempt by clicking here to see a more detailed look at what they're doing. And so as you can see here, I had a couple of instructors sign in as guinea pig students, so to speak, and so that's why they're appearing here. Comments, normally you're not going to enable comments on a test, so this will probably not even come into play, but we'll show you how that works. All right, let's go back to our questions again. Let's make sure that it looks like everything has been saved the way it should. Now notice here, there's a little gear icon. If you click here, if you need to edit your information on this test that we created right at the beginning, use this option. If it's a situation where you really don't want the students to see this, and by the way, this applies to anything that's on the Schoology class page, you can click Unpublish, and if you unpublish it, you'll be able to see it, but the student absolutely will not. And then there's some other options here. Again, you can save it to your resources. That's an option that's common to almost everything in Schoology. We can talk about that more in depth later. Now, we've entered an assignment. We're also going to say that that's an assessment instrument, even though there's all kinds of assessment instruments in Schoology. Again, you can look at the training videos on that, or even go to YouTube and search for it. Student resources, a number of them have already been entered as an example on this particular template. So you can always get back to the home page of the course by clicking up here at the top on the name of the course. And notice the very next thing that you have here is internet links and other resources. This folder has already been created for you in the template. If you click on it, you'll notice that for this particular Bible class, a couple of resources have already been entered. This is a link. That's why it has the little chain. And this is a file. In this particular case, it's a PDF document that's giving the students some tips on how to rent college textbooks, since all students are trying to save money and renting might be a good option. If you want to add any of these types of resources, you're always going to go to Add Materials. How do we add a link? It's right here. Or a file, or an external tool. Just pick which one. Now remember, a file would be things like your syllabus and that we did in the previous lesson. In this case, they had a PDF on renting college textbooks. The link right here, if you want to share a link on the internet with your students, just copy it right off the site and paste it right here, which is a lot easier than typing it in. And then you can put your own particular title on it, even if it differs slightly or drastically from what's on that particular page. So once you do that, let's say I want them to know where the search engine is, www.google.com. And I'll put search engine, and I'll click add. So in a case like this, here's a way for a student to get to a search engine, even though we know all students know how to get to Google, probably. If I click on it, notice that that will come up in the particular, I'm going to click on it there, and it goes to Google in a separate tab. I'm going to go back, and another way to do it full page up here is to click this particular icon, but any kind of links that you want to add or share, they're right there at your disposal in order to add under Add Materials. This is true for any Add Materials, but in this particular example, we were working with internet links and resources. Rubrics are a totally different animal. There's a number of ways and places, rather, where you can create your rubrics. Best practices, I believe, is that you should consider creating your rubrics in your resources. So if we go back to resources, you'll notice that I had folders here created for all of my courses, and that's where I'm keeping a number of my resources. So say for my Humanities 231 class, if I open it up, I've got some of my test banks, and right here I created a folder for my rubrics and some other things right here. So once again, to create a folder, create your class folder first, then create a subfolder inside there for your rubrics just by clicking Add Folder. Type in rubrics, do a description if you want to, choose the color of the folder in order to help keep things straight if you want. I'm going to click Cancel in this case because I've already created it. Notice when I click on rubrics, there's many of the rubrics that I've created for various assignments in our class. Now, generally speaking, you won't create rubrics for objective questions in a test like true, false, multiple choice, things of that nature. But for anything subjective, you always need a rubric. You need a rubric for assessing essays, term papers, thesis papers, research papers, discussions. You have to have a way to be able to evaluate those particular assignments. And there's a particular way that you'll want to create it. And so I'll show you that now, and then we'll go to an example of one that's already created so that you'll see how that works. All right. So in this case, I've got my rubric folder open, correct? I go to Add Resources, and notice there's an option here for Add a Rubric. When I click on it, here is a place for me to create my rubric. Now, we'll be pushing out a rubric template to you that will already have the proper titles set up for your rubrics right here, but I'll go ahead and show you how it works. I'm going to click and drag right down here to make it a little larger. And let's say right here we're going to call this our essay rubric, the one we'll use to evaluate essays. Now, instead of excellent, as you know, we use advanced. And instead of good, we use proficient. Instead of satisfactory, we use marginal proficient. And instead of needs improvement, we use developing. Now, if you want to add another column, let's say something for emerging, where maybe you don't give any points at all. Student didn't do the assignment, so you're just giving them zeros all the way down. You can certainly do that. And all you have to do is click the little plus sign here, and we would just choose emerging, and we'll change this one to a 0. Right? Again, you don't have to have the emerging category criteria. All of these are going to be various types of criteria here. That's what this column is waiting for here in terms of a title. But again, if you want it, it's there. If you want to delete it later, you can certainly do that as well by scrolling over and just clicking the X here, and you can delete that particular, you can delete that particular item. Actually, you don't click here. That'll delete the entire row. Please don't do that. Right here, you can click it, and if I clicked that, the emerging would go away. Now, one of the criteria, I have to create my criteria, and it's very important that we also include at least one student learning outcome on each rubric. If you fail to do that, when you evaluate the student's work, in this case their essay, you'll have nothing that will link to mastery of student learning outcomes, and that's exactly obviously we don't want that. We want to always have a way that we're assessing mastery of student learning outcomes. So remember, it may be more than one, but please have at least one learning objective. So we just simply type in our criteria here for the essay. Let's say mechanics, grammar, spelling, all of these kinds of things. What is it, according to my course, that will constitute the highest possible grade on mechanics? And again, you would just fill that in with whatever it would be. You know, grammar is very few errors in grammar, etc., etc., and just go through that. Proficient would be a notch down, you know, a few, and I'm just dealing with grammar here. Obviously, mechanics would have a lot more than just grammar. Some errors in grammar, marginal proficient, we would fill that in and say many efforts, many errors in grammar, and developing might be something that would exceed even many. So that might not have been the best description, but just something that goes along the line, little to no errors, some errors, more than acceptable errors, and many errors in grammar. We could maybe go at it, you know, something like this. But as long as the verbiage describes what you need in order to be able to evaluate what good mechanics are in the paper, you would use that. All right, now when you duplicate it, now that you've got the proper labels in, notice what happens. Those same titles will come in each time. So in case you're creating a rubric from scratch, please make sure you go ahead and put the proper titles in at the very beginning here on your grading scale so that you don't have to type those in each time. Here, instead of mechanics, because we've already done that, let's say here this is going to be something like MLA format. If you choose to do a longer essay that's in MLA, or this could be something having to do with sources and citations. It may just be something like, you know, clarity of thought and these kinds of things. It could be obviously any number of things. Final thing we want to cover here is learning objectives, which of course to us we're talking about student learning outcomes. Notice when I click on it, it gives me the option to go to my custom learning objectives. I can also do a search, by the way, if I kind of have an idea of what I want to use. And when I click on it, I'll go to my personal custom learning objectives. I'll go to the course that I'm working in. Let's say in this case it's you know, English 131, and I would have more than one learning objective. In fact, tell you what, let's go to something else so that you can see how many options there are. Let's go to right here where I have at least 7 student learning outcomes. And let's say that this is the one. Students will write effective essays with focused and detailed topics, organization, demonstration of experience, word choice, mechanics, etc. I've actually got that kind of combined there. Notice when I click on it, what happened? It appears here on the rubric now, so that I can use that, I can assess that as a part of the rubric, and that will immediately link to mastery for this particular assessment instrument. If I want to add more than one, I can click on it. Besides that, I also think that student learning outcome 7 comes into play. Anytime I click on it, it's there. And then add learning objectives. If I make a mistake and I want to delete one, go to the very end there and I can delete that entire row. In this case, I did that because I decided I just want that. Now when I assess this, I'll just be able to go through on the assignment and click on the appropriate grading scale in the rubric, and that will automatically assess it on a 100-point scale, in my gradebook at least. And then I'm also able to click one of these based upon my results up here. To me personally, the learning outcome is always some kind of average of what's gone on up here among my criteria. So if basically it was a proficient, I'm going to click on proficient here. And then I would create it. Now, it says here all criteria must have a title. So I'm glad that happened. I inadvertently put this down here in the description area rather than in the title area. So I'm just going to do a quick cut, Control X and Control V, and put it up there in the proper area. And here, let's say this was MLA. I'm just putting something in. It may not be that for an essay, but you get the idea. I just want to show you how easy it is to create it. We're going to click Create, and here it is, essay rubric, right down here. And now I can import that into any of my courses so that I can use this rubric whenever I have a particular assignment in that course. Let me show you how easy that is to do. I'm going to go back to my example here, and let's say that I create a particular assignment, and here it is. Actually, I should have created it inside one of the topic folders, but you'll get the idea here. Okay, essay. I would have some kind of description here. Not going to bother to do that at this point. I'm going to assign it once again for tomorrow. I'm going to categorize it as ungraded in this case because I haven't created a category, but I would need to go back and correct that later. Now in this case, I would want to bring the rubric into play, but I don't have the rubric yet because I haven't imported it. But I'm going to go ahead and create the assignment. I'm just going to leave it on numeric up here. Here it is down here at the bottom of the list. There's my essay. Now I need to bring this rubric into my class. How will I do that? I'm going to do that in such a way that I can bring it in directly from my resources. Now, we've created this essay rubric, and our goal now is we have to get it into our course. If it's not in our course, we won't be able to use it for any assessment instrument or any assignment rather that we create in our course. This is really easy to do. Notice that here's the essay rubric. It appears at the bottom of the list. Go to our little gear here, and there is this option here to add to course. That's what we want to choose. So we'll click on it. Now in this case we're working with this example training import. We check it off and click add. Now it says right here at the top the template was added. So if I go back to this course, we now should see this as a part of our gradebook setup, a part of our rubrics. And when we create a particular assignment, it'll show up there in the drop down when we create it in terms of where our rubrics show up. But let's go to our gradebook setup just to see. And notice when I click on rubric, there it is right there, along with the other one that I copied over earlier. Now again, I can delete this from the course. The nice thing about it being created in my resources, though, is that there's always a copy back in my resources. If I created it within the course, I could actually kind of do this backwards. Then I could also save it to the resources. So again, there's more than one way to do this, but that's a way that I think works very, very well. Now, if I go back and I look at my materials here, I can add an assignment, and let's say I want to create an essay assignment. And I'm going to assign it to be due tomorrow. Category, I haven't created a category for things like this yet, so I'm going to just leave it ungraded, but once again, you can create as many categories as you want in your gradebook. Now, here's where the rubric will come into play in terms of an instrument that I can use to assess student success and how well they've done on the SLO. Notice when I click here, my essay rubric appears at the very bottom because it's the most recent one that I've created. If I choose that, you'll now notice that I can't add a learning objective to this particular assignment because it's already a part of the rubric. So that's already taken care of. Show to student, I always want the student to be able to see the rubric. It's only fair that the student should understand how they're being evaluated. I'm going to click on grading options. I'm going to take it off of fall 2018 because I don't want that to show up in that particular grading period, since it's just an example. Now notice my learning objectives appear right here as they showed up in the rubric. Not only does my learning objective that I created for the class appear, but it also lists the mechanics and the MLA, which are actually more criteria than learning objectives, but again, they do appear there just as a reminder. So I click Create, and now I've got an assignment down here that if I go into and look at it, notice my rubric shows up right here on the assignment. The students will be able to see this too. Now, when they submit material here, I'll be able to bring up this essay right alongside it, and as I'm reading it, I can start clicking things off, and it will give me the point total and automatically enter it on a scale of 100 points in my particular grade book. So very easy to set up rubrics, and you can use those obviously numerous times. Here it shows I haven't received any submissions, so because obviously it hasn't gone out to any classes yet. All right. So we've already begun right here to align SLOs with assignments by showing you how to use rubrics. But there's one final thing we want to show you how to do, because we really haven't showed you how to set up individual questions so that they align with your student learning outcomes, and that's extremely important. So we're going to conclude today with that. What we're going to do is once again click up here on the name of the class, so it'll go back to the home page. And let's look at that example quiz that we created. Some instructors I know will find this rather tedious at the beginning, but it's still, we want to underscore how really important it is. Every single, if this is a test, every single question on the test has to be aligned with an SLO. That's the only way we can use it in determining mastery of these SLOs. That will take some time at the beginning, but the good thing to remember is once it's done, for the times in the future that you might be using this test again, except for whatever tweaks and changes you might make, all that's already done. You do it once and it's pretty much finished at that point. So let's see how that works. This is question number 1. We go to our little gear and we click Edit. Now notice if we scroll to the bottom, there's always this little target icon. Now you'll recall that was grayed out in the essay assignment because we were using a rubric, and those learning objectives, again what we call student learning outcomes, that's already taken care of in the rubric. There's no rubric on this. We don't use rubrics on these types of questions, generally speaking. So we must click on the target. Again, we get our list of learning objectives. Go to Personal. In this case, we'll go to the English 131 that we created. And let's say we want to use SLO 1. Once again, I'm going to go back, change my mind. I'm going to go to Humanities. I want more than one learning objective so that we can also show you that you can bring in more than one objective, more than one student learning outcome. Let's say that we're using number 1, and we've got one selected as it shows up there, and we can click Add. Notice it shows up there this particular one, which is basically, regardless of how it's labeled here, it's my SLO1. Now when I save it, that learning outcome is going to be saved along with the question, so when the student answers it correctly, that aligns with the idea that they're mastering that particular student learning outcome. So if I click Save, it will save it with that. But now let's just say, for the sake of the example, this particular question dealt with more than one student learning outcome. I can choose, let's say, number 3. Now notice it has 2 selected. If I click Add, I can double check it. Yes, indeed, it did save both of those with it. Save question. And now as I go back and look at my list, it shows these 2 students' learning outcomes. And if I mouse over it, it will even show me the verbiage of what that student learning outcome is. Once again, I have to go through, and I do have to do this on each and every question, especially in terms of doing objective questions like true, false, multiple choice, etc. Once again, in this case, let's say that this was learning objective number 4. I select it, there it is, I save it. Now I've got a way to be able to track mastery when I go over here, and it will show up, hey, I've got a couple of excellent students here. They have, according to the settings I have right now, they've got a little star there showing they've achieved mastery of that particular outcome based upon the way they answered questions from a previous test. All right, that covers our training objectives today. Please make sure you refer to this video in the future should you need to continue to review, and we will see you next time. And thank you very much.